Good afternoon, fellow participants. The title of my paper is Interviews as a Primary Source for Historical Analysis. I'm Julius Bongkorog. The aim of my paper is first to define what the primary source of history is, and then identify the different primary sources and discuss the advantages of oral interviews as a tool for the collection of data for historical analysis. My main assertion in this work is that oral interview is indispensable in the reconstruction of history in an oral society. And an oral society here represents a society that does not have or does not keep daily records of happenings. In other words, where the culture of recording daily events is not yet part of the society. I use two main sources, primary and secondary sources. And the methodology I adopted for this work was when, through the use of, I used interviews. I collected data through interviews, that is discussions with some lecturers of history in the University of Bamenga, Buea, and Yaoundé, as well as some research students of history. For the secondary sources, they were mostly reviews from other written works by earlier historians and social analysts. The primary source is the first-hand information that is provided by an eyewitness or a direct participant of an event. And there are basically two types of primary sources. The first is unconscious testimonies. Unconscious testimonies are in the form of material remains, fossils, broken items used by people who lived in a site, and they are called unconscious testimonies because those who use these items, the material remains that were left behind by these people, were not initially intended to be a source of information to the later generation, but it turned out to be a very useful form of information and for the reconstruction of man's activities in the past. The second primary source is conscious testimonies. Conscious testimonies are in the form of written documents by the direct participants or eyewitnesses. Conscious testimonies are actually intended to serve as information, a source of information to the later generation. And that is why they are qualified as conscious testimonies. They could be archival records, letters, diaries, autobiographies. Another major source, another major tool within the conscious type of primary source is interviews. And an interview is a conversation with the purpose of obtaining information from a participant or an eyewitness of an event. An interview also could be seen as a dialogue, an interaction between the researcher, the interviewer, and the interviewee with the aim of obtaining information for the reconstruction of man's activities in the past. There are three basic types of interviews. The standardized interviews, or we call it the structured interviews, the unstandardized interviews, or the unstructured interviews, and the semi-standardized interviews. With the standardized interviews, the questions are precise, the information is also precise, because with the standardized interview, the researcher knows precisely what he wants, and the questions are structured to give the desired information. The unstandardized or informal interview Here it's assumed the researcher does not know exactly the nature of the people, their culture, and so it is open. The semi-standardized interview is a combination of the first two, the standardized and the unstandardized. There are some predetermined questions with the semi-interviews, and with the the semi-standardized interviews, the researcher has the opportunity to make a follow-up by probing into the earlier answers given, so as to have an in-depth and detailed information for the reconstruction of man's past. And the advantages of oral interviews, for one, is it is the best way to cross-check information from both a written or an oral source. Through the use of interviews, the researcher can cross-check information and get better clarification from participants of an event or people who lived during the era of that event. It is also good because it helps to fill gaps of missing information. In some instances, some people's names or some characters and personality or actors of history, their names may be left out intentionally, and in some situations, some instances by error, and through an interview, this gap can be filled for a better historical writing. And the third instance, it brings our history to life. It's the best way of reliving history, where an actor of a particular epoch writes or talks and discusses history as it was at the time. However, it also has its pitfalls. Lies could be told, or facts may be forgotten. Where lies are told or facts forgotten, they can as well be corrected through the use of interviews. The researcher interviews as many persons as possible, so as to compare and cross-check information, so that instance of lies telling could be eliminated, and where facts are forgotten, they can be corrected by another informant. In my paper, it is established that interview is the most appropriate tool for collection of data in an oral society for historical reconstruction. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for watching and for listening.